and welcome to another episode of the Cattle USA Daily Podcast. Today, again this week, we are taking an hour-long Next Generation episode that I shortened down to about 25 minutes, but we're welcoming back another guest that we've already had on this Cattle USA Daily Podcast. My dear friend, Paige Harding, her and I had a really long and awesome conversation about succession planning, trust, wills, different things that we need to be doing as cattle producers and just producers within agriculture to be protecting our land, our livestock, our legacies, everything like that. And Paige just has such a gift for breaking it all down. And so we're going to go ahead and get into this awesome conversation with Paige where we just check out all of the things. And of course, this is not my dog, but Tilly has to make a guest appearance today. I am dog sitting for one of my dear friends and employee, Allie. She is away this week on spring break. And so I get to have this little amazing little demon child who has really bad separation anxiety. And I can't shut the door to my podcast studio without her sitting outside wanting in. So she's our guest appearance for the day other than Paige. But let's go ahead and get into this conversation with Paige and just talk about all things succession planning, wills, trust, the difference between them, why you need a trust over a will as a producer, different things like that, and all the things. So let's go ahead and talk to Paige.
I really just from a young age instilled this business mentality. And so that is something that I have always been very passionate about is business. And now a lot of what I do with estate planning and transactional business work is helping people make decisions to better their businesses. And I've gotten more into estate planning because I have noticed such a need for having estate plans. You know, every year we are losing those more and more small farmers and ranchers. And I think a big reason that we are losing those small farmers and ranchers is because they don't have a good estate plan in place. And it is so important when you are going and talking to an attorney about the future of your farm or ranch or small business, you have to talk to an attorney that is well versed in agriculture, that knows what they're talking about. The average attorney that you go to when you're planning an estate, you know, they will say, okay, we'll split it 3 ways, equal down the middle. Unfortunately, that doesn't work with farms and ranches. When you're doing farm and ranch succession planning, what's fair is not always what's equal. So that's a really hard idea to conceptualize, but that is what you have to do when you are thinking about you want to keep this family farm for generations to come. I mean, think about these generational farmers that have their farms have been in, or farmer ranch has been in the family for 6 generations. I mean, of course they want to keep that going. So think if you're the person who it stops with, you know, you want to keep that going. There's such a legacy there. So that is really a need that I've seen and something that I've become very, very passionate about. Another big issue that I've seen in my personal life as well as in my law practice is that some dads, it's typically the dad, will, you know, after you go off to college, if you decided to go off to college and come back and work on your family operation, dad's still making all of the decisions and you haven't really had to make any big decisions yet. So you and I are so fortunate that our dads have had us make big decisions. So if the time comes where suddenly or expectingly dad's not there to make those decisions anymore, we're prepared to do that. However, I've seen a lot of people that, like I said, in my own life and in my law practice who have never had to make a big decision. Dad's always been there to bounce ideas off of. And then they have a very hard time not only coping with the loss of a loved one, but being able to transition and run the business as they should. And I really hope that more young people in our generation will kind of, you know, step up and ask to be at the decision-making table a little bit more alongside their dads or moms, who's ever in charge of the operation. So the biggest difference between a will and a trust is that a will has to go through probate and a trust does not. So typically people will shy away from a trust because trusts cost more money up front. However, they don't cost much money at the end to implement when it really matters. However, a will is different. So wills must go through probate, and that is basically just a long court process that takes about 6 months to a year to finish up. One of the biggest downsides of wills right off the bat is that if you lose a loved one unexpectedly, you are coping with the loss of that loved one. And then, hey, oh, you've got to go get this will probated. So that is something that is just it can be a very tedious, drawn out process depending on your family's unique situation. But probate's tough. I'm not going to lie, it's pretty tough. So a trust is a much better tool for farmers and ranchers to utilize in order to pass down their assets, land, equipment, cattle, all of the things that are involved in a farm or ranch operation. A trust is a much better tool to do that. Really, the most important part of every farm and ranch operation is the land. It is the property itself. If you don't have the land, if you don't have the property, you cannot operate your business, period. So really protecting the distribution of that land is something that trusts are so great at doing. Kind of going off topic a little bit here, when a lot of our farm and ranch trusts, we develop a scheme so that the farming kid will have access to the land. Like we said, land is the most important piece. So, for example, if there are three kids, and only one kid is farming and the other two are not, then we will typically have all of the land. Whenever mom and dad die, all of the land will go into a trust. And then we will create a path so that the farm kid, if there's one or two of them, they can buy that land back from their siblings at a discounted rate. Because when you think about it, if there are pieces of land that have been in the family for generations, why should each generation have to pay for that land and buy that land again? I mean, that's just silly. So we will develop a plan so that the farm kid or farm kids will have an easier time and easier access to buy that land in order to keep the farm or ranch in place. So really, that's the biggest difference between a will and a trust. I really recommend after people get married, typically is probably the best time, or when you hit your 30s, hey, come in, let's do a will at that point. Really, that's all you would need. If something were to go wrong, a will get the job done for you. But once you start to get into your 40s or 50s, you've got a couple LLCs, you've got more tracts of land, you've got a lot of cattle, you've got a lot of really expensive farm equipment. Then we will start looking at a trust, and you can continuously put assets into the trust. So as you acquire more land, as you acquire more equipment, all of those can be put into that trust as well. So really, a trust is easy to manage and continue to manage. It's really easy to think of a trust like a business. Like, think of a trust as its own business entity. And when mom and dad pass on, how is that business going to be structured? That's really the easiest way to think about it.
So if something happened to mom or dad, like, yes, they may still be the sole owners of the LLC, but my name is on things. So like, is that still going to go through probate? Like, what's that look like? Why do I still need a trust in that situation?
Yes. So I took a minute to write it all down before we did this. I will go through some of the documents that have to be filed through probate. So you have to start the administration, and all of these things that I'm listing need a notice or petition, and you must have a journal entry or an order for each of these. So this is just like a peek into the probate process. Start the administration. You have to get an administrator. You typically have to put that notice in the newspaper for a couple weeks. It depends on the situation, but that takes about a month. Appoint an administrator. You have to send a notice to the creditors, a notice to all the heirs, collect all the inventory and value it. Have an affidavit about whether or not anyone's been in the military, family settlement agreements. You have to have a final hearing, final discharge, final settlement. Typically, you have to arrange some sort of public auction and track down some heirs. I mean, probate is just such a long process, and probate also is about costs about 5% of what your estate is worth. So if there's a lot of land in that estate, that will quickly raise the price of how much you have to do with probate. Another reason is just so that your loved one, typically mom or dad, can have a little bit of control over what's to happen. There are also a few tax implications for probate and a will versus how it goes through a trust. So that's something, sometimes that changes year to year depending on the tax code, but there can be tax implications for both of those. So really a trust is the way to go for farming and ranching families. It's really just going to be the smoothest transition for the family, because I think we forget sometimes that, it's hard to lose a loved one. And when you are dealing with the loss of a loved one and you have to make all of these big financial decisions for your family's entire livelihood, that's pretty serious. So having a trust just helps to have a direct plan all in place. With a will or a trust, we do this a lot more with trust. But you plan it out exactly what you want. So the other day I was working with a client and they just had a brand new baby girl, and we were talking about what would happen to her if something were to happen to her parents. And so we put special clauses in there stating, when she's 10 years old, if she likes her school and is excelling in her school and this person is able to take care of her, then she will stay with this person. If not, she will go to this person. When she is 15 years old, and if she this and this and this. So we really outline it and customize it to fit your unique needs. And yeah, there's just a lot we can do. They're a great tool for succession planning.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you talk a little bit more let's come up with a fake scenario. So there's a LLC ranching farming operation that there are 3 kids, and 2 of them one is a rancher, one's a farmer with the ranching operation. They're involved. The third one is off in New York City running on Broadway and not involved at all. There are certain situations where you said earlier, fair is not always equal. And there is such a grave importance of having an attorney that knows agriculture and is involved in agriculture and understands how to make it so it's not just like we're splitting it 3 ways. Well, what does 3 ways mean? You can't split the tractor 3 ways. And guess what? I need this tractor, like this specific tractor, to go feed hay, and brother needs this specific tractor and combine to go do his things, and like things like that. Fair is not always equal, and equal is not always fair. So I would love if you could just kind of dive into just like the specific different ways that you can be so particular with the different clauses and just different things like that, just spatting some of those out.
Yeah. So in that sort of situation, we would probably do some sort of split. When mom or dad passed, brother who's only farming gets all of the farm equipment and all of the tools that he needs to do that. Brother that is only ranching gets all of the cattle and all of the equipment and tools that he needs to do that. And then unfortunately, the New York sibling probably won't get any of that. But why would he or she want it? Why would they need it? Those kids have come back and decided to work and take over that family operation, and they've been working alongside dad for all these years, and that's their entire livelihood. So they need those tools in order to do their job. After that, we would probably have all of the land go into the trust and be held in trust for 10 years, and have all of the kids would own it, a third, a third, a third, but it would be held in trust. So then brother that's farming and brother that's ranching can rent the land that they want, that they are using for their specific operations, and they will pay rent into the trust, which will get distributed out to each of the New York sibling and then the farming and ranching sibling. So really they're paying like 2/3 rent. And then we can put a clause in there that says farming brother can buy the fields for 70 cents on the dollar. ranching brother can buy all the pastures for 70 cents on the dollar. So really, again, that will be paid into the trust and will be distributed to all three of them. So that will help that they are still getting that land and gaining that land, and they are still paying, but it is a much more accessible way for them to do so. So again, we don't have, dad bought all that land. Why do we need to have the same family buy the land again? And that may seem unfair. That may seem unfair because New York sibling isn't going to get an equal split of the land, but New York sibling can buy the land if he or she wants to. He can as well. So then you have to think of it that way, though, that farming brother and ranching brother are also going to end up with some debt because land prices are still high. 70 cents on the dollar makes this a lot more reasonable, a lot more attainable, but land prices are still high. They are still going to go into debt. So that is a good way to think about it. If you want to keep that farm or ranch in the family, that's the kind of thing you have to do. This was such a great learning experience for me because I saw how this went so terribly wrong. One of my first days of work, we had a client who came in. He had two sisters who both moved off of the farm and ranch, and his dad had created a trust where everything was split equally, a third, a third, a third. So his dad had spent his entire life, and of course, what did the two sisters do who didn't farm or ranch anymore? They sold the land right away. So then his dad had been working his whole life to build this big operation because, that's most people's goals, to get that big operation, to get more ground. And then automatically 2/3 of it was gone in the blink of an eye. So then this brother had to buy back at full cost all of the land that he had lost that his sisters had sold. And he spent almost his entire life doing that. So he came to us and wanted an estate plan for his children. His children were in kind of a same situation. Half of them were on the farm, half of them were not. So he was very distraught and he said, I don't want my kids to have to go through this again. So it's really hard. It can be a really touchy subject. But if you want the family farm ranch operation to stay in the family, sometimes you have to make these tough decisions, and what's fair is not equal. But I think that most siblings understand at the end of the day, because even if you're off gallivanting in New York, I mean, you have to still think, wow, I love the family farm or ranch. Most people still support it, I would say, or at least people that I've dealt with. It is so important to get an attorney, not even just an attorney that if you have a farm and ranch operation, go to an ag attorney, absolutely. But you have to get an attorney that is the right fit for you. And I don't think people realize many times, it might just not be just going to one attorney and then doing all your business there. I mean, feel attorneys out, go to a couple. I give free consultations. Your first hour with me is free because I really want to get to know my clients and help them the best that I can too. So you might not get a perfect fit the first time. So that's something to keep in mind. But I had a client the other day come in and his dad had passed away and they still had their spring calves. They hadn't sold them yet. And he said, oh, the attorney told me I couldn't sell these yet because we haven't started probate. And we said, sell the calves, put the money in the estate, have the check go out to the estate of blank, because you need to get those spring calves sold because, before we know it, we're going to have to be putting out bales of hay. And if you don't want to keep those calves through the winter, you need to get them sold now. So things that are very important to have an ag attorney for if you have a farm or ranch operation. In that first consultation, I will just be asking some questions. What does your operation look like? Do you farm and ranch? How much property? How many kids? Are any kids farming? All, just really getting to know you, asking all the necessary questions. Then we kind of get to the more serious part. And I say, okay, who do you want to handle your estate if something were to happen to you? Okay, who's a backup? If your kids are minors and something happens to you, who do you want them to go to? Okay, a backup. So even those conversations are very, very hard. Some people are blessed to know exactly who they want to take over their finances and exactly who they would want to take care of their kids, but many people don't. So if you have that conversation and are kind of prepared for that before you come in, that will help a lot. So we'll have all of those, more touchy feeling, deep conversations. And a lot of times people don't know. I feel like it's been about half and half. People will have an answer and know, and will get it written down that day. And then the other half says, okay, we need a couple weeks to think on this. So I'll hand you a list of questions or a list of information that I need from you. And I'll say, go think on this. Call me when you find out. So then we'll have another phone call or meeting, talk about how we want things split up. If there's one farming kid, or like we've talked about before, do we want to do the discounted land and trust? Do we want the kids to run the small business that you own? Do you want to require them to run it together 50-50? We'll discuss all of those things, and then I will draft the documents. And then we will have another meeting and we will walk through the drafts together. I will explain what everything means because unfortunately legalese is so confusing, but don't worry, I've got your back. I will walk you through all of it. And then if we see anything that we want changed, we'll make those changes. If you decide you want to go an entirely different route, we'll go an entirely different route. So I can make suggestions. I will make suggestions. I'll ask you, what you want. I'll tell you the tax implications of this. I'll tell you how that will look, how that could potentially look generations down the line, pros and cons of different clauses that you can put in there. But at the end of the day, it is you and your family making this decision. So I try to give people a couple different options and really just paint a picture of what all of the potential situations are. And then at the end of the day, like I said, it's your estate plan, you decide. So then after all of those changes are made, if any, we will have one final meeting, sign all of the documents, and I will keep some of the documents. You will keep a copy of the documents, and there we are. That's it. Typically, I tell people to come back around like every 5 years to reevaluate their estate plan. Were there any new marriages, new divorces? Your kids are all over the age of 18 now. One kid came back and then moved off the family farm. So we'll go over all of those things about every 5 years. And sometimes there's not any changes. So that's great. So that's really the process. I'm super easy to work with. And like I said, I will give you all of the options, all of the what ifs, all of the possibilities. But at the end of the day, it's you and your family making those decisions. And sometimes I do have to facilitate tougher discussions. Sometimes people come in and have no idea, and I can be that person if you want me to facilitate and mediate those tougher talks that you have to have if you're making big decisions, if this could lead to something else, I can be that person to facilitate and mediate those. But really, it's a pretty easy process. I found that lots of people are very stressed and anxious and nervous when they come in, and then they leave feeling very happy and relieved. So like we've said, these conversations are very, very difficult to have, but they are necessary and they are so worth it in the end. It is so great to have that clarity and sense of peace, definitely for the people who are creating the trust, because they will know that what they've worked their entire lives for, really, there is a plan. People always say, like failing to plan is planning to fail. And that could not be more true with estate planning. And then I think that children are often so relieved as well. Unfortunately, I had a client just earlier this week who they thought that his dad had a will or a trust or something. He had talked about making a trust a lot, and then he suddenly passed away, unfortunately. And they have called almost every law firm in Kansas because they thought that their dad had a trust and they haven't been able to find anything. So now they're all of a sudden going through the probate process. So these are hard conversations to have, but really the earlier the better and the more frequent the better.
I hope that you guys all enjoyed today's version of our episode today on the Cattle USA Daily podcast. If you could take a minute to like, subscribe, rate, review, all of the things, we really appreciate it here at the team. Share with a friend, share with a family member. This is a great episode to share with family members before you go and start having those hard conversations, talking about succession planning in the future, all of those things. This is just a great episode to break it down for everyone before you sit down at the dinner table and start to discuss it all and things like that. So as always, we appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for being here. If you want in on the full conversation that I had with Paige on the Next Generation podcast, I will have that episode linked down below where you can go and listen to the full hour and just hear my thoughts and opinions, everything like that, and just get a little bit more of the conversation that we had today. If this is a topic that you guys loved and you have questions, want to hear more from a legal perspective, things like that, make sure you send us an email, write a comment, send us a DM, anything like that. And we can definitely have Paige back on again and continue to discuss this more in any aspect that you guys may need as listeners. As always, we're here to serve you, and thank you guys for being listeners and supporting the Cattle USA Daily podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we will see you all tomorrow with a market report with Dan.